I want to learn and hear what everybody has to say. And if you ask someone for their opinion, they have one. But I also have to recognize, is that feedback really pertain to the direction I'm going? Is that person an expert in this particular industry? Or is it coming from a place of founder experience or investor experience? So I'm not so overwhelmed or trying to spend all of my time creating a pitch deck that everybody likes versus just getting the work done.
Let me invite you to sit back, drop your jaw, tongue, and shoulders, take a deep breath, and if you wish, close your eyes for a moment and feel the beat within. In a few seconds, you just jumped from your head to your heart and felt the beat within, opening up to receive even more value and fulfillment out of your business and life. And today's episode. I'm your host, Nico van der Venne, confidant to successful CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs striving to achieve everlasting fulfillment. Now, before we dive into today's episode and our next guest, I have a small request. So if you find value in our podcast, share it with at least one person in your network that can be, informed with the content. Leave us a 5-star review and give us some feedback, people. Ask us questions because it's always much more fun when we ask questions from the audience. And share it around the world, of course. So thank you for the support. Let's get started. Welcome to the Everlasting Fulfillment Podcast, Leanne Linsky.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here to talk with you today.
Yeah, we've been on quite a road to get here, but that's perfectly fine. It's always good in the end that we meet up. I got one question for you that I want to launch this conversation with. So, have you ever heard of CEO disease and founder syndrome?
Not officially, but I think I've experienced it.
Okay, that's a good start there. And how did you experience that wonderful thing?
I think say it again. Founder syndrome.
Founder syndrome, CEO disease. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's this, for me anyway, what my experience has been is this need, like this innate need to solve a particular problem that I'm extremely passionate about. And on the flip side, so that's like the positive side of it. And on the dark side of that, like in small print, side effects also include, getting fatigued and getting feeling isolated and questioning, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? All of the things, and and then picking myself back up again and then being like, oh, this is why, this is what's happening. And then the cycle repeats. So that's what it seems like for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah, especially the isolation indeed is something that's more out there than we know. Indeed. I love your history, by the way. We talked about it a little bit in the green room. Your background is comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit how you got there and what founder you are right now, where you got right now?
Yeah. So part of how I got there is 2 divorces.
Okay. That's one way.
But honestly, I believe it started way before then. I grew up in a very funny family. I have 2 older brothers and my parents who are all very quick-witted and smart and hilarious. They always have a sense of humor. And I think for us, it was a really healthy coping mechanism growing up. And so I've always learned like ways to break the ice and how to socialize with people is using some form of levity with my humor. And as I went through college and things like that, my professors, I would do really well with presentations because I would always interject humor. And my parents really encouraged me to hone public speaking skills at a young age and would always very encouraging of the idea of practicing before I presented. And so although like they weren't in jobs that required public speaking. They were often involved in social events that they would be the person that would be nominated, or they would volunteer to do those things. And so they were just like, "You just do it and you practice," and they'd have me practice presentations for school and everything in front of them all this time. So, and then, of course, add humor. So it really kind of stemmed from there, but I got into my I actually enrolled in my first comedy writing class in 2001, and that was because I was doing a lot of public speaking for my day job at my career at the time, and I wanted to interject, like, Johnny Carson kind of monologue into some of the things I was doing. I'm like, "Well, I need to learn how to write that." So I enrolled in a comedy writing class, and then eventually, one of my coworkers were like, "The Second City has, opened a training center here." So I'm originally from Illinois in the Chicagoland area, and so I was very familiar with the Second City, which is a theater group, known for political satire and sketch comedy, and a lot of the big names from Saturday Night Live were originated in the Second City. And well, the Second City ended up opening a training center in Las Vegas. So I went to college in Las Vegas. What a great place to go to college. Am I
Yeah. Wow.
right?
Okay.
No brainer here. But so I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go. And then I signed up for one class and I ended up taking like all their classes, I think, and then some of them 2 or 3 times. So I was hooked doing improv and sketch writing and things like that for 5 years. And then that day job, that career that I had, I was working for a Fortune 500 company,
Mm.
and I thought I'd be there forever. Honestly, like, I loved it. I had been there for nearly 13 years and I got laid off.
Hmm.
And so my friends that I had met in the theater and whatnot, they're like, "Hey, didn't you say if you didn't have that job you loved, you would move to New York?" And I was like, "Why? Why were you listening to me?" And so one of my friends that I had met on a trip to New York where I did some classes and stuff on a vacation, he had reached out and he's like, "Hey, I found a sublet and you had mentioned you might be moving to New York. Do you want to share a sublet with me?" And I'm like, "Well, I have to think about it." He goes, "You have 1 hour." So I called him back. I said, "I'm in." And a month later, I packed up 2 suitcases and moved to New York.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is kind of my little long story of how I got there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it intrigues me to go to college in Las Vegas.
Oh, yeah.
That's one hell of a bet. Oh
One heck of a chance my
yeah.
parents took. What were they thinking?
Might have ended up in a different way, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I did my first 2 years, of my undergrad, in Illinois. I went to a community college and got my associate's degree, and I did well, and I'm a first generation college student on my dad's side of the family,
Uh-huh.
and so they were like, "Wow, you made it." I'm like, "You can let's see if you can continue this." And so I got accepted to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and off I went. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what was the next step in your story? You ended up in New York, being the
Yeah.
most humoristic person there, probably because all the rest are very boring. I lived in New York for a very short time. People there didn't like me. I'm
What?
from Belgium. It's just a weird country with a weird accent. So, what happened to you there? I
Okay,
hope it was.
so you're from Belgium. So when I lived in New York, when I first moved there, I lived in Manhattan, and then I moved to Queens. I was living in Astoria, Queens, many of those years. Um, but my neighbor upstairs, we lived in a 3-story uh, home in Queens. Like each floor
Yeah.
was its own unit, and my upstairs neighbor was from Belgium also.
Oh, cool.
So,
Small world.
yeah. Yeah, so her mom would come and stay in the summers and everything. It was so fun, and then our landlord, she lived on the 1st floor, and she was from Greece, and so she'd stand at the bottom of the stairs, and she'd call up at us. She's like, "Oh, I made something." And I'm like, "Well, what is that?" And she's like, and then she'd put, like, an American spin on it. So then I knew what it was that I was eating, but food was fantastic. It was a lot of fun. But I moved to New York and I have just immersed myself fully into the comedy scene, taking classes, getting improv groups, getting in stage time, doing all the things. I eventually started an open mic, and then I hosted that open mic for 7.5 years while I was there. I
Okay.
produce shows. I wrote my one-woman show, which I premiered in New York, and then I took to Washington, D.C., and then to, Wilmington, Delaware, and then back to New York. So I was performing it for, like, over about a year. Of course, it took me at least that to write it. So, um, I did that. I did some commercials. I did some theater, and then eventually I moved from New York to California, and, uh, people are like, "Oh, did you move to LA for your comedy?" And I guess you could say that. I moved there for a man, and that turned out to be a joke. So, I that's yeah, new material. Um,
Yeah, yeah, it's one
I
way of doing it,
yeah,
it's like
I ended up meeting my husband there, and we've been together ever since, and it's been awesome. So, but I stayed there, and what I quickly I learned, wow, being in New York, we were very spoiled with wonderful mass transportation because I could take the subway and multitask, but I could get around so easily, and I could get stage time each night and do all the things. But in LA, it's like gridlock traffic. So I was spending more time on the highway than I was on any stage. And I was like, this is bananas. How do I fix this? And so this was the end of 2014, beginning of 2015 that I had moved to LA. So I was like, maybe I'll take some things online so I can save money on gas and work out new jokes and still remain connected with people from the East Coast. And then I was like, "Oh, maybe I'll use Skype or Zoom or something." And then life happened, and I started doing a podcast, which I told you about. I was gonna do a comedy podcast about divorce, and it turned out not to be funny to most people. So I'm the weird one, because I thought it was hilarious. And then I took some time to I'd spent so many years talking at people from the stage that I ended up going to school to become a life coach so I could talk with people
that's
and
nice.
become a better interviewer and really have more deep and meaningful conversations, especially on bigger topics. And that was such a wonderful experience. Highly recommend Coachville if anyone's considering doing life
Mm,
coaching.
right.
Um, but just like and even if someone doesn't intend on being a coach, just if you're leading a team or just wanna improve communication, what a beautiful way to do it. So, I did that and had a coaching business. I was still doing comedy. I was producing some shows in California. And then I thought, "You know what? I think it's time that I try this online thing I was talking about." So this was in August of 2019 BC, before COVID. And some
Yeah.
people were like, "Why would I do comedy online?" And other people were like, "Hey, this is really cool because now I'm meeting people from coast to coast, and when I travel, I know somebody, I can book gigs, I can,
Oh, yeah.
have a connection." So there was, like, real value to it. And then, of course, COVID happened, and suddenly everybody started doing that, right? And as that happened, what I realized when I initially set it up, I was using one technology for this, one for signups, one to promote it, my coaching website with a special page on it for open mics, like, kind of cobbling together all these different apps or softwares to make something happen, which can get pricey. It's a lot of work. And I was like, how do I kind of fix all these problems, but not just for me, but for more people? So I uh, quick sidebar, I had always promised myself that I would reconsider going back to school at the age of 50 to get my master's degree.
Okay.
So guess what? During COVID, I was turning 50. So about a year or so in advance, I was telling my husband, I was like, I'd always made myself this promise that I'd ask myself, hey, is this relevant? Like, is this important to me now? Should I revisit it? And I really wanted to because I think I'm a big fan of continual learning and
Mhm.
also staying relevant, and I don't wanna become one of those people who's just like, "Well, this is the way it was always done, and back in my day," you know? Um, and I'm like, "You know what? There's things have changed. There's this whole entrepreneurial ecosystem I don't know anything about, and how do I make those connections? How do I expand that network so I can make my vision come to life of how I can fix these problems?"
Mm.
So I went back to school at University of California, Irvine, and got my master's in innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's where I had taken this whole idea, like, this is what I wanna work on in this program because it's very applied learning. It's a very
Oh yeah.
accelerated program so that you can take what you learn that day and then go out that week and do it. And so, I started building out, like, my vision of, like, here's all the things I wanna do with this online platform to solve, these various problems. So, upon graduation, I was accepted into an incubator, and so that was really helpful because that led me to an accelerator, which led me to funding, and I could build a team because I am a non-technical founder,
Hmm.
which is really challenging when you have
Can
a
imagine.
tech company idea. So it took me a while. I think, like, one of my biggest challenges was, like, how do I find the right team? And as I interviewed people and talked to people, some people be like, "Well, why don't you just do this and stream to YouTube?" I'm like, "'Cause that doesn't solve the problem." Like, and also it exists. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna compete with YouTube, but, what I was thinking of is so different than what actually existed. And so I eventually found wonderful people, and I have been working, primarily with the same team since then. So we launched, onto the internet in December of, what year is it? 2022, and we've been going ever since.
And that's where Plauzzable then really came into fruition then.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So I had originally called it online open mic. And then during COVID, suddenly everything was an online open mic. I'm like, well, that's
Yes.
pretty generic, Leanne. I should probably come up with a name. And I think I spent like days and like 10 sheets of paper writing down every possible name that I could come up with. And it was like a blend of what domain isn't already taken and
Yes.
what
Yes.
makes sense? So it was like like a plausible,
Uh-huh.
and that's where it came from.
Oh, it's a very good orientation, you know. You get, yeah, it's simple once you know exactly what's behind it. So
Yes.
so just for the audience, what's exactly behind Plauzzable? What's the idea behind Plauzzable? What's the problem that you're solving with your story there?
Right. So basically, Plausible is a live online comedy platform, which means you go to plausible.com and it is, if you're familiar with Etsy, are you familiar with Etsy?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Etsy is a marketplace for do it yourself businesses and buyers. And Plausible is a marketplace for comedians and their fans. And
Okay.
so when you log into Plausible, you can log in as a comedian, create your profile. You get a profile page with your picture and your background, your bio, and all that, and your upcoming events. And then you get the scheduling tools, the virtual stages, the ticketing services, everything built into Plausible. So you can perform live online on Plausible, see and hear your fans in real time and hear them laugh, see them laugh. So there's no fourth wall where you're waiting for a like or stopping and going like this off screen to read your
Yes.
chat or like me putting on your readers. Um, so it's live and interactive because in comedy, um, it is like we need to hear your
Mm,
response in real time. It's not the same when we have to like do it by ourselves in a room with no with
yeah,
received with
boring.
silence and then hope someone likes it. I like a lot of things, but it doesn't mean I listen to the whole thing. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
of
Like
course.
so this kind of bridges a gap. It's not intended to replace in person because personally, I don't think we can replace an in-person event. As humans,
No.
we need that one-on-one interaction, but it certainly can bridge a gap in opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity missed between an in-person event and something that you record in your own space, edit, and then post and hope somebody comments or engages with later.
Yeah.
So that like what happens in real time and also it eliminates the problem of geographic boundaries. Now
Mm,
people have access to an intimate, personalized performance
yeah.
that they might not otherwise had unless they traveled to my area in which I'm performing in, and I can reach a global fan base. And so that's one of the problems it solves. It solves the problem of other online technologies that aren't designed specifically for entertainment or, actual stand-up comedy or sketch comedy, we have our designs and audio set up so that it's conducive to what we need. Um,
Okay.
versus going into a room and then feeling like, "Oh, I was just here for an accounting meeting. Now I'm back again to watch entertainment." Like, that should not be the vibe. No offense to
No.
our accountant friends, but,
Yeah.
it should look and feel and behave differently for an entertainment, value. And so, so that's what we offer there, but the 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 bigger sense of it, we took it a step farther so that there's no gatekeeper. You don't, like social media, you don't have to ask Mark Zuckerberg for permission to post something. On Plauzzable, the comedians don't have to ask our permission to host an event. They can host a class, a workshop, a show, or an open mic. And, they have all the scheduling tools there. They have access to start their own event and end their own event and invite who they want to invite.
Okay.
And then the fans can come in, they can search by all of the events that are happening and pick and choose which ones they wanna go to. There's a lot of free ones, there's some paid ones. And then the fans can also go through the talent directory and see what comedians are there and look at their bios and their profiles. And if they click on follow them, that doesn't mean they have to, like, look at a feed of what they ate for breakfast. That means that they'll
Mhm,
get
mhm.
notifications that,
Yeah.
hey, the comedians they followed posted a show or an event they might be interested in. So
Okay.
and they can set their notification preferences however they like. But it's that kind of a marketplace that gives the comedians control of what and when and how they perform, and fans control of what kind of comedy they like. They can sort by clean, which is like not family friendly because it's an above 18,
Okay.
site,
Yeah.
but more innuendo, double entendre, no
Yeah.
cuss words, things like that. And then you have moderate, where you might have an occasional, uh, bad word. And then you have your club, what you'd expect if you saw a comedian in a club. And then there's what they call blue, which is pretty dirty, raunchy, maybe shocking.
Okay.
So if that's
All the
not your thing,
categories.
don't pick that comedian. So, yeah.
You can go through the whole shebang just to test everything. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of the Netflix of comedy then.
Exactly,
That sounds
except
like
it's
great.
live. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
video on demand, it's all live.
Oh
There are
yeah. That's
some comedians who will record, they have the ability to record a show,
mhm,
and they can publish it in the past events library, and so you can go through the past events library and see, like,
mhm.
workshops or open mics or, so you kinda get a vibe of what people are doing.
Okay. Well, that's a very interesting platform. I think it's very interesting. I'm just thinking about what you said earlier when I asked you about founder syndrome. When you said, "Why am I doing this?" You were saying the more negative part about founder syndrome instead of the positive one. You know exactly what you want. The positive thing is like, "Yeah, I want to do this," blah blah blah. And then the other side is like, did you? This is one of those questions that a lot
Mm.
of people are. Why did you ask me that? Did you really come to a point of saying, F word, I've had it, stopping right now, not doing this anymore?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, there's been points of like, "Why am I doing this? I should really stop doing this." And then but am but at the same time, I'm like, I kinda laugh at myself because 'cause I'm like, "Don't be dramatic, Leanne." Like, because I have to do this. I can't, even when I talk to my husband, like, if something's really hard or something, I'm like, "Well, maybe, should I go and explore it?" And he's like, "Well, you could." And then I go and I look at something, I'm like, "But I can't see me doing that." And I'm so passionate about what I am doing,
Mhm.
and I also am so committed to it that no matter how hard something is, when it comes to the business, I don't see myself walking away. Not
Uh-huh.
yet, not at this
Yeah.
point. I think there's still work to be done, and I feel like, entrepreneurship is it's an it's an evolving piece of art, It's
Mm.
never done. It's not a destination, it's a journey, and, sometimes I'm pushing the boulder up a mountain, by myself, and sometimes the boulder's running me over. I don't
Yeah.
I mean, there's good days and there's bad days, but there would be good or bad days at any job. And,
Sure.
this is something that I feel strongly about. And I think, when those things cross my mind, I look at the people using my site. There's people using my site. There are people connecting and doing things and collaborating and creating. And so that keeps pushing me forward.
So does that also feed your isolation of, being an entrepreneur? Because I know that a lot of entrepreneurs like myself sometimes feel like I'm doing this by myself, even though you have a team and a lot of people around you. You're the foundation of the idea. If you're pushing that boulder and it's running you over, who
Yeah.
do who does this the saving within yourself?
Yeah, I think that I felt isolated way more in the beginning of the journey, than I do now, and or maybe my perspective. Let me change that. Maybe my perspective on isolation has changed. Now I find it comforting in some ways, and the reason for that is because at the beginning, I wanted to surround myself with people within the ecosystem, which I think is very important, and there's value to it all along the journey, not at just one point, but maybe sometimes it's more important at different milestones than others. But it was really important to me to, like, connect with people and find out, but there's also a fine line of connecting with people, but also feel like I'm comparing myself. And that's when I think that's takes me to the dark side of when I'm comparing myself to somebody else because their business isn't even like mine or
Mhm.
but they're getting accolades or they're getting funding or they're getting this or they're getting that. And then I'm like, oh, why not me? But so what I've really kind of learned is it's not I might not be doing everything in the ecosystem or having like founders meetings every week or something. Like I do think those are important, but I also am conscientious of how what I'm getting from it, what I'm taking in because I don't want to get derailed and feel, like if I go to a pitch competition or an investor and entrepreneur thing, everybody's putting their best out there and they're telling you
Mhm.
the good things, but not everybody's sharing the dark side.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
it's like I gotta remember, like, not everybody's telling me, like, but they're also, having this experience. So, I think it's just like filtering, learning the isolation has changed because I've really become better at filtering what information is coming at me, and also when I choose to go out into the wild and do those things, and better prepare myself for what I'm taking in and also what I'm putting out there. I think that's really important too. How am I showing up to things? But the part I do like a little bit about some isolation, especially reflecting back, at the beginning, I was taking advice from everybody. I was like a sponge. I want to learn and hear what everybody has to say. And, if you ask someone for their opinion, they have one. Like,
Yes, that's
right.
sure.
But I also have to recognize is that a valid, is that feedback really pertain to the direction I'm
Mhm.
going? Is that person an expert in this particular industry? Or is it coming from a place of founder experience or investor experience that it doesn't, it's kind of industry agnostic, but kind of better filtering that information so I'm not so overwhelmed or trying to spend all of my time creating a pitch deck that everybody likes versus just getting the work done. So I think a lot kind of goes into that. And I kind of appreciate now some of my quiet time and not always seeking something in that outside influence and kind of determining when I need that and when I just kind of need time to reflect and mull things over, noodle on something or now that I have, been working with the same team for a long time, like we've built this rapport and relationship and they fully understand what we're doing. So they're great resources, which in the beginning, I didn't have anybody. So it kind
Of
of,
course.
everything kind of changes. It's kind of a long answer. I don't know that it's all one thing or all not or all another.
Well, it's amazing what you're saying about becoming comfortable with the isolation,
Yeah.
and it's indeed something that I've had with entrepreneurs in the past within my confidant part of the business. When I talk to people, I hear them say, I do feel isolated. I can't tell my story to anybody. What's going on?
Mhm.
If they're in a run, who can I talk to their partner? Well, not always, because there's a lot of solopreneurs who have a partner, but they're doing a daytime job, so they don't understand what all the entrepreneurship responsibilities and so on are. And even sometimes a lot of people that I talk to, their partner is struggling with the fact that they're entrepreneurs, so they don't want to hear
Yeah.
about it. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of these things that kind of work, but that's just on the relationship side. But on the other side as well, if you're in the space, for instance, in your space, you have all these people around you with an idea in their head, and everybody has an agenda. It's not that they want to use it as a negative thing, but it's a human thing of saying, oh, that's a good idea, I can do something with
Yeah.
that. And it's just normal. And at some point you kind of learn to basically shut up. That's kind of what you learn.
Yeah.
Don't tell your idea to anybody, because it's not that they're going to steal it in the same way, but it's something you kind of give away a part of yourself. That's what I've learned.
Mhm.
And it's like I said, I love the fact that you're saying that you started to learn to accept the isolation and live with it. The same for me as well. I've been doing a lot of things in the past as well, and I threw it out there, and indeed as well, sponge. Ask everybody's opinion and
Mhm.
ideas. How many social network advisors I've met in the past is just they just pop out of the ground like mushrooms, I think. But in any case, there's some valid info from there, but you just start filtering, and when the filter becomes a natural aspect of who you are, then the isolation also becomes a natural
Yeah.
aspect of yourself. And then it's the idea of standing in front of a virtual mirror or a real mirror and saying, what the hell have you been doing this past 3 days? And then saying, reflecting on, and I've learned, and I recently put this as a post on LinkedIn as well, is to sit in a meeting room. I work at customer sites, and I sometimes have time in a meeting room, and I actually move seats. I talk to myself by moving seats, and it's I'm gonna act as the annoying one now. Is I don't know if you know the Big Bang Theory. You probably know the Big Bang Theory, one of the comedy shows in the U.S., where Sheldon sees himself in all these different chairs, and one of them is his mic is his what is germaphobe. The other one is this cowboy, and so on. And I tried to do the same, not especially putting the clothes on, because it's kind of weird in a customer's environment. But anyway, I do change these profiles and start discussing things with myself, and then I come to a point realizing like, oh, I never thought of that before. While you're talking to yourself, which is kind of
Yeah.
crazy, but works. And that's one of the things that I do want to bring out there. You're showing exactly what I think is good, is that the isolation is a good thing. You
Yeah.
can really make it as a power and not as, oh no, poor me, I am
Yeah.
not, etc., etc.
Yep.
But it's amazing to hear that. So that's great.
I
Now,
agree. Can I add one other thing to
oh
that?
yes,
I
absolutely.
I also think, like, to your point, I love that your idea of the sitting in the different chairs and seeing yourself with, like, different perspectives or a different
Hmm.
personality type, and I kind of think that that's how I view, like, the people using my site, right? Like, what would they think? How would this person look at this problem? Um, and I really pay attention, okay, if I'm in their shoe, but like put myself in their seat, how would I view
Yeah.
this problem? And that usually can help me solve the problem. And the other thing is I realize that I've also learned to, when I do bring something to the table, like a question, or I'm seeking some information or validation of an idea or whatever it may be, testing a hypothesis. I really spend more time in isolation putting that thought together so I could be clear when communicating it. Because if I'm not, there's no telling what can of worms I'll open up. But I think going back to my users rather than other founders in other industries and stuff, going back to my users and my customers is so valuable because observing and listening, I can get so much on better ways to help them than some of my own ideas, you know? And then if I want to test something, I can throw it out there and see, and I can watch, say, what do you think, this or this? And I can watch them how they work through it. And I can clearly see the answer, it's so that's also some time in isolation to reflect that is really helpful.
Yeah. So there's a lot of positive news out here, listeners. If you feel isolated, don't live with yourself and change your perspective by yourself. And like you said, Leanne, talk to your customers. That's one message that's pretty darn
Yeah.
important. Listen to what, because the final point is they're buying stuff from you. So there's must be something that you're doing right,
Mhm.
and can even do better. So Leanne, thank you so much for your time today. I think we've got a bit of everything that we talked about, and I find what you're creating, or you have created, something very intriguing and great that it's out there, because I think there's a lot of people that might not have the possibility to travel and see their favorite comedian or whomever they want to see. No, that's great. So let's say, where can people find you? I think it's probably plauzzable.com or something like that.
Yep.
That'd be very easy. People, if you're listening, it's Plauzzable. It's not applause and then something else. So it's very important. So tell us, where can they find you, and how can they contact you if they want to, go a little bit deeper into who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, plausible.com, you can usually find me on there. There's also a contact me form, or you can go to LinkedIn and find me as Leanne Linsky. There's one of me in the world, and if there's another one, report it because it's a bot. So,
Copywriting infringement.
right, you can't duplicate this. Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me also.
Super. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show and tell us about your point of view on these topics. And to the listeners, thank you so much again, everybody. Don't remember to put that 5-star review and share with somebody who might be interested, especially on the comedy side there. Very, very prevalent at this point. And thanks again for listening, everybody. Have a great
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Everlasting Podcast. Let me leave you with a few questions to answer in the comments. How do you see the different topics we discussed during this interview? What are your thoughts? What stood out for you? Let us know in the comments, or just send us your feedback. We launch new episodes weekly. Don't miss any by ensuring you are subscribed to the show. Click the follow button now. We depend on the organic growth of the podcast to inspire more and more people. So by giving us a 5-star review and sharing this episode with at least one of your friends who might be interested in the subject, you will significantly help more people become inspired. But more than anything, I am grateful to you for taking the time to listen to the show. If you are also a successful CEO, founder, or entrepreneur who has inspiring words to say, feel free to contact us for an interview at contact@nicovandevenne.com. Thank you for listening. We will see you again soon with more inspirational conversations on achieving everlasting fulfillment.